What would you do if you discovered a secret about your parents so terrifying, so incomprehensible, that it made you question everything you thought you knew about them? Imagine waking up one morning to the news that the people who raised you, guided you, and loved you had been violently taken from this world. Now imagine that in the aftermath of that unimaginable tragedy, you stumble across something hidden, something locked away for a reason. A journal full of cryptic entries, confessions, and fears that no one else was meant to see. This is exactly what happened to Romy Reiner, the youngest daughter of filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The Reiners were not just any family. They were Hollywood royalty, household names whose lives were on display for the world to admire. Rob Reiner, the celebrated director behind classics like When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men, was known for his charm, wit, and towering presence in the entertainment industry. Michelle, elegant, poised, and supportive, was the anchor of the family, managing the public's perception of their life while holding together the threads of a private world no one else saw. Their son Nick lived in the guest house on their sprawling $13.5 million Brentwood estate, close enough to be a part of the family, but separated enough to have his own world. No one could have imagined that Sunday morning would end in horror. By the time authorities arrived at the estate, Rob and Michelle had already been stabbed to death, victims of multiple sharp force injuries, according to the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office. The world recoiled in shock as the news broke, unable to reconcile the image of this seemingly perfect family with the violent tragedy that had just occurred in their home. And then, the unimaginable twist. Their son, Nick Reiner, was arrested that very night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Romy Reiner's world shattered in an instant. Not only had she lost both parents in a manner that was brutal, senseless, and horrifying, but the person she had grown up with, who had shared her childhood and her home, was now accused of taking their lives. The grief was overwhelming, but it was not the end of the shock. In the days that followed, Romy discovered something hidden in her father's private study, a locked journal that had remained secret for years. The journal, as Romy would later reveal, contained writings that terrified her. It spoke of family tensions, anxieties about Nick, and cryptic entries like "he's slipping away." There were passages that hinted at Rob's fears, not just for his career or public image, but for the very safety and cohesion of his family. Some entries were practical, almost mundane, cataloging daily events and concerns. Others were deeply personal, revealing emotions that no one else had witnessed. Romy, in those first moments of discovery, felt a chilling mixture of fear and responsibility. She was forced to hide the journal at first, unsure of what it meant and what repercussions revealing it could have. But deep down, she knew the truth it held needed to be shared. What did Rob Reiner know that no one else did? What did he fear, and why was it so important to document these fears in writing? And perhaps most chilling of all, did he see the events leading to that tragic Sunday coming, even in some vague, intuitive way? These questions hung over Romy as she grappled with grief, confusion, and a sense of urgency. Each page she read seemed to reveal more than she was ready to face. Each sentence teased a story within a story, a hidden layer of her parents' lives that the public had never seen. Before the journal, Romy had only known the Reiners as her parents. Loving, protective, flawed, but fundamentally devoted to their family. After the journal, everything changed. The entries painted a more complicated picture, one in which Rob's anxieties and suspicions created an undercurrent of tension beneath the surface of their public lives. There were moments that suggested he feared for the stability of his household, and perhaps even foresaw conflicts that others dismissed as trivial or temporary. Romy began to understand that the seemingly perfect family veneer had cracks running deep, cracks that, tragically, may have widened to a catastrophic breaking point. As we explore this story, it is important to remember that this is not just about crime, about Hollywood gossip, or about the shocking headlines. It is about a family, a daughter, and the unraveling of a life that the world thought it knew. It is about fear, betrayal, grief, and the human instinct to protect, to hide, and sometimes to reveal what must not remain buried. Romy's journey, from daughter to reluctant guardian of her father's darkest secrets, is one that invites us to question the very nature of truth, perception, and legacy. Think about it. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Could the signs have been there, hidden in plain sight, in gestures, comments, or notebooks tucked away on a shelf? What would you do if you found a secret so profound that it could change your understanding of your own family forever? Romy had to confront all of these questions while processing an unimaginable loss, all while navigating a world eager to consume every detail of her family's tragedy. And yet, the story is far from over. What Romy found in that journal would not just reshape her understanding of her parents. It would force her to confront fears, secrets, and truths that no one outside the family had ever seen. As we dive deeper, we will explore the events leading up to that fateful day, the intricate dynamics of the Reiner household, the hidden warning signs, and the shocking revelations that Romy unearthed. Every page of the journal, every anecdote, every recollection adds a piece to the puzzle, a puzzle that grows darker, stranger, and more compelling with each discovery. By the end of this journey, you will not only know what happened that Sunday in Brentwood, but you will understand the complex web of emotions, secrets, and fears that led to it. And just as Romy did, you will be left grappling with the haunting question: how much of our loved ones' lives do we truly see, and how many truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered when it is already too late? But before we get there, before we unravel every twist and every secret, we need to go back to the beginning, to the outwardly perfect image of the Reiner family, and to the subtle tensions that no one outside the household ever noticed. Because in order to understand the horror, the fear, and the revelations that followed, we must first understand the family as they were, the image the world saw, and the private reality Romy began to uncover. And what comes next will reveal that even the most ordinary-looking families can hide extraordinary secrets, and that sometimes those secrets are more terrifying than any headline could ever capture. The line between love and fear, protection and obsession, reality and perception, all of it begins here. And just like Romy, you are about to step into a story where nothing is as it seems, where every revelation is a shock, and where the truth, once discovered, can never be unseen. What does a perfect family look like? If you asked anyone in Hollywood, the Reiners would have been near the top of the list. From the outside, they seemed untouchable. Rob Reiner, the legendary director with a string of iconic films to his name, and Michelle, elegant, poised, and always a picture of grace beside him. Their estate in Brentwood was a symbol of success: sprawling gardens, immaculately designed interiors, a life that many could only dream of. And their children? Nick and Romy, seemingly grounded, well-behaved, part of a family that appeared flawless in every photograph, every public appearance. But what does perfect really mean? Is it measured in accolades, wealth, public adoration? Or is it measured in the silent moments no one sees? The arguments behind closed doors, the sighs in the night, the secrets carefully tucked away? For the Reiners, perfection was a mask. And like all masks, it hid cracks. Some small and harmless, others that would grow into fractures too wide to repair. To the world, Rob Reiner was a man of charm, intellect, and humor. He could command a room, direct a scene, or make a casual conversation feel monumental. His career had spanned decades, and he had a way of making people feel seen, on screen and in life. He was celebrated, respected, almost untouchable in his confidence and reputation. Yet, even the most celebrated figures often carry burdens that remain invisible to those around them. Michelle Reiner, often the quieter presence beside Rob, was no less formidable in her own way. She had the uncanny ability to manage a family under the microscope of public scrutiny while keeping the household running smoothly. Her charm was understated, but it was undeniable. People admired the couple as a unit: the power, the grace, the apparent harmony. Yet, as with any family, the surface could not fully reflect the undercurrents of tension simmering below. Romy Reiner grew up in this environment of contrasts: the public perfection, the private tension. She learned early that appearances mattered. Family dinners were conducted with a careful balance of warmth and decorum. Disagreements were often masked by smiles and polite nods. But Romy, perceptive and sensitive, could see through the veneer. She noticed the way her father sometimes lingered in thought a little too long, or how her mother would soften a tone only when others weren't listening. She saw the subtle ways that worry, fear, and anticipation threaded through the family's daily life, though no one spoke about them openly. Nick, the eldest, was the son who seemed to live in the shadows of both the family home and public expectation. A man in his early 30s at the time of the tragedy, Nick had his own world in the guest house, but he remained intrinsically linked to the family's rhythms, routines, and, as the journal would later reveal, tensions. Romy's memories of her brother were a mixture of affection and unease. There were times when his moods were unpredictable, when the playful banter of childhood would give way to moments of silence, or even anger, that no one could explain. Friends and acquaintances of the Reiners described the family as close-knit, warm, and generous. Parties were lavish, but never ostentatious. Conversations flowed easily between industry insiders and neighbors alike. But those who knew them intimately also noted something else, a quiet intensity, a sense that the family operated under pressures invisible to outsiders. Rob's career success brought prestige, but also a relentless demand for perfection. Michelle's careful management of the household and public perception created a world in which appearances were paramount. And in the midst of it all were the children, navigating expectations that were both public and profoundly personal. Despite the outward appearance of harmony, there were subtle signs of tension. Romy recalls moments from her youth where arguments would end abruptly, as if a silent alarm had sounded and everyone knew the rules. Never discuss certain topics, never challenge certain opinions, never question the delicate balance that held the family together. She remembers the journal entries, written much later, that reflected a father deeply aware of these tensions, a man attempting to document fears he could not openly voice. It is easy to look at the Reiners' life from the outside and assume it was idyllic. The home, the reputation, the seemingly perfect family dynamic. All of it suggested stability, even happiness. But as Romy would discover, perfection is often a careful construction, one that hides the cracks until the moment they can no longer be ignored. The tragic events that unfolded at the Brentwood estate were not merely a sudden eruption of violence. They were the culmination of pressures, fears, and unspoken conflicts that had quietly shaped the family's reality for years. Even the most ordinary moments of their lives carried undercurrents of significance. A casual comment, a delayed response, a tone of voice, all hinted at deeper emotions. Romy learned, over time, to read these signs. She became attuned to the subtle ways in which her parents expressed concern, caution, and occasionally, fear. And while many of these moments were fleeting, in hindsight, they would take on a weight that no one could have predicted. One of the most striking things about the Reiners, Romy recalls, was their commitment to each other in public. They were often seen attending events together, smiling for cameras, engaging with fans and colleagues with warmth and approachability. Yet, behind the curtains of privacy, the family navigated a different reality, one where fear, tension, and suspicion quietly intertwined with love, loyalty, and devotion. This duality, the perfect image and the hidden truth, is central to understanding what would later be revealed in Rob's journal and why Romy felt compelled to share it despite her initial hesitation. The contrast between the public and private faces of the Reiner family underscores a critical point. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones closest to home. The outward perfection can obscure underlying volatility, and the people we trust most can harbor fears, doubts, and even intentions that we cannot see. Romy's journey begins here. In the world of appearances, charm, and carefully curated perfection, but it will not end here. As we follow the story, we will peel back the layers of this family's life, uncovering the tensions, the anxieties, and the ominous signs that led, inexorably, to tragedy. What Romy would come to realize, reading her father's journal in the aftermath of that Sunday, was that perfection is fragile. It can mask fear, resentment, and unspoken danger, but it cannot prevent reality from breaking through. Every detail, every diary entry, every subtle gesture tells a story, and sometimes, that story is far darker than anyone could have imagined. And just as Romy began to piece together the complexities of her family, she encountered a revelation that would alter everything she thought she knew. Some secrets, once discovered, cannot be hidden again. They demand to be seen, understood, and confronted, even when the truth is terrifying. Sunday mornings are supposed to be ordinary. The sun rises, the coffee brews, the world stirs slowly awake. But for the Reiner family, that Sunday would be anything but ordinary. It began like any other, with the quiet hum of life in Brentwood, the soft rustle of leaves in the sprawling gardens, the occasional chirp of birds. Inside the estate, routines unfolded with practiced precision: breakfasts, morning emails, casual conversation. To an outsider glancing at the security cameras or photos of the property, nothing seemed amiss. But inside, the air carried an unseen tension. Romy recalls that in the weeks prior, there had been subtle shifts in her family's rhythm. Her father, Rob, had been more introspective, lingering longer over trivial matters, double-checking appointments, and muttering about responsibilities that seemed to weigh heavier than usual. Michelle, always the anchor, appeared slightly more tense, her smile polite but fleeting. Even Nick, who lived in the guest house, had exhibited behavior that seemed unusual, long periods of isolation punctuated by moments of irritation. These were not red flags in isolation, not something the world would notice, but together, they created a faint signal of the storm to come. That morning, the estate hummed with life in a deceptively calm way. Rob was in his study, papers strewn across the desk, coffee at the ready. Michelle tended to small tasks in the kitchen, preparing a breakfast that would never be eaten. Nick's presence in the guest house was almost invisible, but it was there, the quiet footsteps, the occasional glance toward the main house. The day appeared ordinary. But ordinary days, Romy would later reflect, often hide extraordinary events, waiting for a single, devastating shift to reveal the unimaginable. The timeline of that day is critical to understanding what unfolded. Around mid-morning, the household fell into an uneasy silence. Neighbors later described noticing unusual stillness at the estate, cars parked in unusual places, and the absence of normal activity. Inside, no one could have predicted that what they thought was routine would soon be shattered in an instant. By early afternoon, the unthinkable had occurred. Rob and Michelle were found in their home, victims of multiple sharp force injuries. The sight was horrific, the shock immediate. Emergency responders, upon entering the estate, described scenes that seemed almost cinematic in their brutality, a stark contrast to the meticulously maintained perfection of the house. For the first time, the public would glimpse a fracture in the seemingly flawless image of the Reiners. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's report confirmed what authorities had long suspected at the scene. Rob and Michelle had been fatally stabbed. Their deaths were violent, sudden, and incomprehensible. But the horror did not end there. That very night, Nick Reiner, the son who had grown up within the walls of the Brentwood estate, was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The world reeled. Headlines flashed across television screens, phones buzzed with notifications, and social media exploded with speculation. How could this have happened? How could a son be accused of killing his own parents? For Romy, the personal impact was indescribable. The grief was overwhelming, almost paralyzing, but it was compounded by a sense of disbelief, confusion, and a gnawing fear about the hidden truths she had yet to uncover. In the hours following the arrests, she wandered the estate, tracing the paths of her family members through the rooms they had once inhabited. Every detail seemed magnified. The cup of coffee Rob had left half-finished, the newspaper Michelle had been reading, the subtle signs of her brother's presence in the guest house. Each object became a symbol, a piece of a puzzle she was desperate to understand. And then, she found it, the locked journal in her father's study. The discovery was accidental, almost mundane. A drawer, a slight misalignment, a key tucked in a place only Romy would have known to look. But the contents were anything but mundane. The journal contained entries that chilled her to the bone, revealing anxieties about Nick, reflections on family tensions, and cryptic phrases like, "he's slipping away." The words suggested foreknowledge, fear, and a careful observation of events that no one else had noticed. For Romy, it was a terrifying confirmation that the outward perfection of her family had been masking a deeper, more troubling reality. The emotional weight of that discovery was immense. Romy had to process grief, horror, and betrayal simultaneously. She felt an urgent need to protect the journal, to hide it from prying eyes while attempting to understand what it meant. The entries were not just words on a page. They were a window into her father's mind, a map of fears and suspicions that had remained hidden for years. And now, in the aftermath of murder, they carried a new and terrifying significance. Neighbors and friends, watching from a distance, struggled to reconcile the image of the loving, accomplished Reiners with the violence that had occurred. Many found themselves questioning what they had seen, what they had assumed, and how well they truly knew the family. Social media erupted with speculation, with theories ranging from psychological breakdowns to unresolved family disputes. But Romy knew that the truth, as always, was more complex than any headline could convey. Authorities, meanwhile, began to reconstruct the events of the day. Every phone call, every visitor, every movement within the estate was scrutinized. Nick's presence in the guest house became a focal point, his actions analyzed, his motives questioned. For the public, the story became a sensational headline: a famous director and his wife murdered by their own son. For Romy, it was a labyrinth of grief, fear, and the realization that the family she thought she knew was far more complicated and far darker than she had ever imagined. The juxtaposition of the outwardly perfect image and the hidden truths uncovered in the journal raises a haunting question. How many families carry invisible cracks beneath a veneer of normalcy? How many tragedies are preceded by subtle signs that are ignored, rationalized, or misunderstood? Romy's experience is a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that the ordinary can be shattered in an instant by events that no one saw coming. And yet, even in the depths of horror, Romy found a sliver of purpose. The journal was more than a record. It was a key to understanding the family dynamics, the fears, and the hidden tensions that had shaped the household. Each page held clues that, when pieced together, began to reveal the complex mosaic of life, love, and danger within the Reiner family. But as she turned the pages, she realized that the most shocking revelations were yet to come. Each entry hinted at events, emotions, and observations that had gone unnoticed, unspoken, and unresolved. The journal was not just a record of the past. It was a roadmap to understanding the tragedy, and perhaps even a warning of consequences that no one had heeded. Romy's journey through grief, discovery, and revelation was only beginning. What she would learn from the journal would not only redefine her understanding of her parents, but would also force her to confront truths about her brother, her family, and herself that she could not have imagined. When you grow up in a family like the Reiners, your every move is scrutinized by parents, by society, and eventually by the world. Nick Reiner, the only son of Rob and Michelle, had always lived in that complicated space, part child, part observer, and eventually, a man whose actions would shock everyone who knew him. Before that Sunday, Nick had been a relatively private figure. Unlike his father, who thrived in the spotlight, Nick preferred a quieter life. He lived in the guest house on the Brentwood estate, a physical separation from the main house, but still under the watchful gaze of his family. To outsiders, Nick appeared like any other young man in his early 30s, charming at times, private at others, with a life that seemed ordinary despite the extraordinary family he was part of. But Romy, who had grown up alongside him, knew the layers beneath. There were moods that shifted without warning, moments of withdrawn silence, and occasional bursts of anger or frustration that seemed disproportionate. She remembered little incidents that, at the time, seemed inconsequential. A slammed door, a muttered remark, a stare that lingered too long. In hindsight, they painted a picture that no one outside the family could have understood. On the day of the tragedy, all those private observations transformed into public scrutiny. Within hours of Rob and Michelle being found, Nick was identified as the prime suspect. Law enforcement moved quickly, reviewing security footage, interrogating family members, and examining the guest house for evidence. The arrest was swift. Nick was taken into custody the very night of the murders, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The world, which had seen him as part of a picture-perfect family, now faced a shocking question. Could the son have killed his own parents? For Romy, the news was both devastating and incomprehensible. The boy she had grown up with, the brother she had shared childhood memories with, was now the face of a crime so violent it seemed almost unreal. She struggled to reconcile the playful sibling of her memories with the accused man in custody. Grief, confusion, and fear collided in her mind. How could she reconcile her love for her brother with the horrific allegations against him? How could anyone, even within the family, begin to understand what had driven him to such violence? Friends, neighbors, and colleagues were equally stunned. Those who had interacted with Nick in social or professional contexts described him as polite, somewhat reserved, and intelligent. There had been no public indicators that he was capable of extreme violence. And yet, within the private sphere of the family, the signs, subtle though they were, had existed for years. Nick's relationship with his parents had always been complicated, marked by tension over independence, expectations, and unspoken conflicts. Small disagreements had escalated over time, and Romy, through the journal, would later see that her father had been aware of these tensions, noting them with concern and, occasionally, fear. The role of the journal in understanding Nick's behavior cannot be overstated. Romy's discovery revealed a father who was observant, anxious, and acutely aware of the potential for conflict within his own household. The entries painted a picture of a young man struggling with internal pressures, family expectations, and emotions that sometimes erupted unpredictably. Rob's words reflected worry, a desire to protect, and perhaps even a premonition that certain tensions, if left unchecked, could lead to disaster. Publicly, Nick's life became a media spectacle. Every action, every court appearance, every statement was dissected in headlines and social media threads. Yet, beyond the sensationalism, there was a complex human story. Nick was not just a suspect. He was a son, a brother, and a product of a family environment that, while outwardly perfect, had been layered with tension, fear, and unspoken pressures. Psychologists and legal analysts would later examine Nick's profile, searching for motives, triggers, and patterns that could explain the tragedy. Was it a moment of uncontrolled rage, a calculated act, or the culmination of years of unresolved familial tension? Romy, reading her father's journal, began to see hints of explanations that no expert could fully articulate. Rob's observations about Nick's moods, about family dynamics, and about subtle conflicts became hauntingly prescient in the wake of the murders. Even as the investigation unfolded, Romy faced her own private battles. She had to navigate grief while protecting the journal, a document that contained insights into her father's fears, Nick's behavior, and the hidden undercurrents of family life. Each page she read added layers of complexity, emotions she recognized, suspicions she had never voiced, and insights that explained patterns of tension she had long sensed but never fully understood. The public's perception of Nick was binary: accused, guilty, and sensationalized. Romy's understanding of him was far more nuanced. She remembered the brother who had confided in her, the young man who had shown kindness and frustration in equal measure, and the son who had shared in family joys and sorrows. Reconciling these memories with the reality of the charges against him was a daily struggle, an emotional tightrope that left her exhausted and fearful. As the investigation progressed, the media spotlight intensified. Experts dissected past interviews, family friends were interviewed on camera, and every detail of Nick's upbringing was scrutinized. Yet, despite all the public analysis, Romy knew that the key to understanding Nick, and what had led to that horrific day, lay within the pages of her father's journal. There, the subtle patterns, the small signs of tension, and the private reflections that had gone unnoticed for years were all recorded. Nick's arrest marked a turning point in the Reiner family saga. The outwardly perfect image had crumbled, revealing fractures that were not just structural, but deeply emotional. Romy faced the impossible task of reconciling love, grief, and fear, of protecting a secret, understanding a tragedy, and confronting the fact that her brother, the person she had known most intimately, was at the center of a crime that would shock the world. In the midst of public scrutiny, legal battles, and media frenzy, Romy began to realize a chilling truth. Appearances can be deceiving, and even those we trust most may harbor depths we cannot comprehend. The outwardly calm, picture-perfect family had hidden complexities, anxieties, and fears, some recorded, some expressed, and some left entirely unspoken. And in that realization, she understood that the story was far from over. Some discoveries are accidental. Some are deliberate. Romy Reiner's discovery of her father's journal was somewhere in between. In the days following the tragedy, after the initial chaos of law enforcement investigations and media scrutiny, she found herself wandering the Brentwood estate, retracing the steps of her parents, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. It was during one of these moments, a quiet, almost meditative exploration of her father's study, that she noticed it. A drawer slightly misaligned, a faint gleam of metal that didn't belong, a lock that seemed almost to beckon her. The journal was not flamboyant, nor was it obvious. It was a simple leather-bound book, worn at the edges, with a small, delicate lock securing its contents. To the casual observer, it might have appeared mundane, just another office item. But Romy knew, instinctively, that this was no ordinary notebook. Her father had always been meticulous. Every note, every schedule, every personal thought had its place. The presence of a locked journal suggested something meant to be private, guarded, and perhaps, in the wrong hands, dangerous. She hesitated. Her instincts screamed caution. What if this journal contained things that could complicate the already unbearable situation? What if it revealed truths about her brother, her parents, or even herself that she was not ready to confront? Yet another part of her, the curious, determined part, compelled her to unlock it. She remembered where her father had hidden the key, tucked away behind a small stack of books, as if knowing that only someone truly close to him would find it. Her hands trembled as she slid the key into the lock. What she found inside was far beyond what she had expected. The pages were filled with meticulous entries, a mixture of mundane observations and deeply personal reflections. Rob wrote about the family's daily routines, noting small tensions between members, but there were also passages that chilled Romy to her core. He had written about Nick's moods, his anxieties, and behaviors that, at the time, might have seemed minor but now carried ominous significance. Some entries were cryptic, almost poetic, like "he's slipping away," a phrase that haunted Romy as she read it over and over. The emotional impact was immediate. Romy felt fear, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This journal was more than just a record. It was a testament to her father's fears, his attempts to understand the dynamics of his family, and perhaps even a warning of events that would soon unfold. Each page she turned seemed to draw her deeper into the inner workings of the Reiner household, the anxieties, the suspicions, the love, and the tensions that had defined her family for years. The entries revealed a man constantly vigilant, always observing. Rob noted small incidents, behavioral patterns, and subtle interactions that suggested concern about how his son's actions might escalate. There were reflections on family disagreements, warnings about leaving minor conflicts unresolved, and even moments of self-doubt, where he questioned whether he was doing enough to maintain harmony. The journal was a window into a mind grappling with fear, love, and the weight of responsibility. Some passages, however, were downright alarming. Rob wrote about situations in which he feared for the safety of the household, cryptically referencing potential outcomes if tensions were allowed to fester. There were moments when he reflected on the unpredictability of human behavior, the fragility of relationships, and the potential for tragedy lurking behind seemingly ordinary interactions. Romy read lines that made her stomach twist, notes about isolation, about moments when Nick seemed distant, almost unreachable, and phrases that suggested a growing sense of unease. It was clear that the journal had been written over a long period of time. Some entries were recent, reflecting Rob's ongoing observations and concerns. Others were older, almost like a timeline of his evolving fears and insights. As Romy read, she began to piece together a narrative that paralleled the outwardly calm life the family presented to the world. But underneath, there had been tension, anxiety, and warning signs that no one outside the household could have seen. The responsibility of holding this journal weighed heavily on Romy. She was acutely aware that the contents could have legal, emotional, and social implications. If revealed prematurely, they could be misinterpreted or used against her brother. Yet, hiding the journal felt equally wrong. These were truths that her father had recorded, insights that were now crucial to understanding what had happened. Romy realized that she was the custodian of information that could alter the course of public perception and, perhaps, even the investigation. As she continued reading, patterns emerged. Rob had noted behavioral shifts in Nick, subtle changes that might have gone unnoticed by casual observers, but were significant to someone paying close attention. He had written about fleeting anger, moments of withdrawal, and emotional volatility that, taken together, suggested a deeper unrest. Romy, reflecting on her childhood memories, recognized these moments, incidents she had long dismissed as trivial but now understood as critical signals. The emotional stakes of the journal were amplified by grief. Romy was mourning her parents while simultaneously trying to comprehend the deeper truths hidden in their lives. The journal forced her to confront realities she had avoided, that the family she had known was complicated, fraught with tension, and, in ways she had not fully grasped, vulnerable. It was a sobering reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that perfection can mask fear, and that even the people we love most can harbor worries and insights that only time and tragedy reveal. There were also moments of tenderness within the journal. Rob's love for his family was evident, interwoven with fear but unmistakably present. He wrote about small joys, achievements, and moments of connection, revealing a man who, despite his anxieties, cherished his family deeply. Romy felt a mixture of sorrow and admiration. Sorrow for the loss of such caring parents, and admiration for the meticulous care with which he had recorded his observations. But as Romy closed the journal that evening, a new realization settled over her. This was only the beginning. The pages she had read hinted at further truths, secrets that had been obscured by grief, media frenzy, and the immediate chaos following her parents' deaths. Understanding these secrets fully would require courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront realities she might not want to face. The journal had opened a door into her father's mind, into the dynamics of the Reiner family, and into the darker currents that had run beneath the surface of their outwardly perfect life. And as Romy contemplated the path ahead, she understood one undeniable truth: some secrets, once uncovered, demand to be shared. Every family has secrets. Some are small, harmless whispers meant to protect feelings or avoid embarrassment. Others are heavier, capable of shaping behavior, relationships, and even the course of lives. The Reiners, despite their outwardly perfect image, harbored both kinds, and some of the heavier, unspoken tensions had been quietly building for years. Romy, reading her father's journal, began to see what she had long suspected. The veneer of perfection had always concealed a more complicated reality. The journal revealed a pattern of careful observation. Rob had chronicled moments of tension between family members, particularly focusing on Nick. He noted subtle irritations, unspoken disagreements, and behaviors that could seem trivial to outsiders but, in context, hinted at deeper discord. "He doesn't talk when he's upset," one entry read. "And when he does, it's sharp, almost accusatory. I wonder if I've missed the signs." These were not casual observations. They were the thoughts of a father concerned that the undercurrents within his household might escalate into something more dangerous. Romy reflected on her own memories of her brother. Nick had always been private, sometimes distant, occasionally explosive in ways that were both baffling and frightening. Small incidents that had once seemed isolated, a slammed door, a cutting remark, a sudden withdrawal, now took on ominous significance in light of her father's writings. Rob had noticed these patterns, analyzed them, and recorded them meticulously, almost as if preparing for an eventuality no one could predict, but he feared might occur. The tension within the family wasn't limited to Nick. Rob also wrote about his own anxieties, about the pressures of maintaining the family's image, about balancing careers, and the need to protect his children from external scrutiny. Michelle, though less vocal in the journal, appeared as a stabilizing force. A presence that Rob relied upon, but also felt pressure to protect. The entries painted a picture of a household where love and loyalty coexisted with stress, fear, and unspoken worries. Some passages were particularly chilling. Rob expressed concerns about moments when Nick seemed distant or unreachable, cryptically noting that these were periods where small conflicts might escalate beyond control. He questioned his own parenting, wondering if certain actions or inactions had contributed to underlying tensions. Romy read these lines and felt a shiver run through her. Her father had perceived instability in her brother long before the tragedy, long before anyone outside the family could have guessed what was coming. Other entries revealed moments of family conflict that, while seemingly minor, now appeared fraught with significance. There were disagreements over finances, career decisions, and daily routines, arguments that would have seemed trivial to an outsider but, in hindsight, were subtle indicators of growing stress and miscommunication. Emotional beats in the journal were striking. Rob's fear was intertwined with love, his caution with hope. He reflected on the challenges of raising children in the public eye, on the need to balance personal relationships with career obligations, and on the difficulty of navigating emotional turmoil without exposing it to the world. These entries were deeply human, revealing the insecurities, vulnerabilities, and protective instincts of a father who cared profoundly about his family. Yet amid the love and concern, there was tension that Romy had never fully grasped as a child. The journal suggested that her parents had disagreements and unresolved conflicts, some of which involved Nick directly. There were mentions of arguments that left a residue, moments when emotions lingered longer than expected, creating undercurrents that influenced behavior, trust, and communication. Romy, reading these notes, realized that the family's outward harmony had been carefully curated, masking a more complicated emotional reality. Some entries hinted at secrets Romy had never imagined. Rob wrote about private fears, fears about what Nick might do when frustrated, fears about the pressures of fame on their family, fears about events he could not control. There were cryptic warnings, almost like riddles, that seemed to foreshadow events without fully explaining them. Lines like, "I can only hope it doesn't come to that," or "the smallest spark could ignite more than I can contain," suggested anxiety that transcended ordinary parental concern. The journal also revealed Rob's attempts to mediate conflicts, to observe without interfering too heavily, and to maintain the delicate balance of family life. He documented strategies to manage disagreements, moments where he hoped for understanding, and instances where communication failed despite his best efforts. Romy could feel his frustration, his helplessness, and his enduring love, a complex mixture that made the tragedy that much more poignant. Romy herself became a lens through which these tensions were refracted. Her father wrote about her occasionally, noting her sensitivity, her intelligence, and her capacity for empathy. He saw her as someone who could understand the nuances of family dynamics, someone who might one day piece together patterns he could not fully explain. Reading these entries, Romy felt a profound connection to her father's perspective, a shared awareness of the complexities and hidden fears that had shaped their family. The more Romy read, the more she realized that these tensions were not sudden or isolated. They had been building for years, quietly shaping the relationships within the household. Arguments, withdrawn behaviors, cryptic remarks, all were pieces of a larger puzzle. Her father had recognized the danger, had recorded it, and had tried, in his own way, to prepare for outcomes that he could not prevent. And yet, despite all of this, the tragedy had still occurred. The journal, while illuminating, also posed questions. How much could have been prevented? Were the signs truly missed, or were they simply unavoidable? Romy grappled with guilt, confusion, and a deep sense of responsibility. Not only for understanding the past, but for deciding what to do with the knowledge she now held. The revelation of these family secrets and tensions marked a turning point in Romy's journey. She understood that the story of the Reiners was not just a tale of public tragedy, but a deeply private narrative of love, fear, and unresolved conflict. The journal had peeled back the layers of appearances, exposing the undercurrents that had shaped the family's life and, ultimately, its destruction. But as she turned the pages, Romy realized that there were still deeper truths yet to uncover. Secrets that Rob had recorded, tensions that had not yet been fully explained, and patterns that pointed to outcomes no one could have predicted. The story was far from complete, and the journal held more revelations, some personal, some dangerous, and all critical to understanding the full scope of what had happened. Fear is an invisible presence in many families. Quiet, persistent, sometimes unspoken. In the Reiner household, Romy's father chronicled this shadow in the pages of his journal. It was not fear of ordinary dangers, but a fear that seeped into daily life, shaping decisions, behaviors, and relationships. Rob wrote about a sense of unease that had settled over the family over time, subtle yet persistent, like a low hum that only those attuned to it could hear. Romy remembers it differently, in fragments. Moments when her father's gaze lingered longer than usual, when he would pause before opening the door to Nick's room, when Michelle would exchange a knowing look with him. As a child, these moments seemed trivial or even imperceptible. But now, reading her father's words, Romy understood they were markers of tension, signs of a fear that had been quietly growing beneath the surface. The journal revealed that Rob had been worried about more than just everyday family conflicts. He had written about what he described as an undercurrent of unpredictability in Nick's behavior, a volatility that could escalate if provoked. The entries were careful, almost clinical, documenting moods, patterns, and interactions with an eye toward understanding and, perhaps, preventing disaster. Romy could feel the weight of his concern on every page, a mix of parental love, anxiety, and a desperate attempt to anticipate the unimaginable. Fear, in this context, was multidimensional. It was fear of what could happen if tensions escalated. It was fear of external perceptions, the scrutiny of the public eye on a private family crisis. And it was fear of the unknown, the realization that even with love, understanding, and guidance, some outcomes were impossible to control. Rob's journal became a map of this fear, each entry a waypoint that traced the trajectory of worry that had defined the household's emotional landscape. Some entries were particularly haunting. Rob described nights when he lay awake, listening to sounds from the guest house, trying to determine if Nick was safe, if the family was safe, if the tension in the air would erupt into violence. These reflections were not dramatic or sensationalized. They were deliberate, careful observations of a father deeply aware of the fragility of the world he had built around him. The shadow of fear also extended to the children. Romy read passages where Rob reflected on how fear affected her and her brother, noting their sensitivities, responses, and coping mechanisms. He was aware that children internalize parental anxiety, and he wrestled with the tension between protecting them and preparing them for reality. Romy realized that this careful attention to emotional nuance had shaped her own instincts, her ability to notice small signs of distress, and ultimately, her perception of the tragedy that had befallen the family. Fear, as documented in the journal, was not only reactive but anticipatory. Rob wrote about hypothetical scenarios, potential confrontations, and outcomes he hoped never to see. Phrases like, "I dread what could happen if this pattern continues," or "I fear the smallest misstep could escalate," peppered the pages. These were not idle thoughts. They were the considered reflections of a man attuned to the subtle, often invisible dynamics that influence human behavior. Romy also found entries reflecting Michelle's perspective, though less frequent. Her mother's voice came through as stabilizing, pragmatic, yet equally aware of the dangers of underestimating underlying tensions. Michelle's influence, Rob noted, was essential in maintaining calm, in balancing fear with reason, and in nurturing resilience within the family. The interplay between Rob's anxious observations and Michelle's grounded guidance painted a portrait of a household attempting to manage fear without succumbing to it. A delicate balance that, tragically, could not hold indefinitely. The journal highlighted specific moments when fear had dictated actions. There were notes about limiting access to certain areas, monitoring communications, and intervening subtly to prevent arguments. Rob's entries revealed a father constantly on edge, balancing the need to maintain normalcy with the need to intervene in ways that could prevent escalation. Romy, reading these words, felt both admiration and sorrow. Admiration for her father's vigilance. sorrow for the inevitability that even his careful planning could not prevent what had come to pass. Fear, Romy realized, had been a silent architect in the household, shaping behavior, influencing decisions, and defining relationships in ways that were invisible to outsiders. It was a presence that both protected and constrained, a shadow that provided insight but could not prevent catastrophe. As Romy continued through the journal, she understood a crucial truth. Fear is powerful not only in what it causes people to do, but in what it prevents them from doing. Rob's meticulous observations, his foresight, and his attempts to mitigate danger reflected a profound understanding of this paradox. Yet, despite his vigilance, the tragedy that unfolded revealed the limitations of fear as a protective force. The shadow of fear would prove to be a central theme in understanding the events leading up to that fateful Sunday. It shaped Nick's behavior, influenced Rob and Michelle's decisions, and permeated the atmosphere of the household. Romy's confrontation with this fear, both through the journal and in her personal reflections, would become essential in piecing together the complex web of factors that led to tragedy. And as the pages turned, it became clear that fear was only the beginning. Beneath it lay deeper secrets, hidden conflicts, and revelations that would challenge everything Romy thought she knew about her family. In every family, there are conversations that never happen, words left unsaid, feelings suppressed, disagreements avoided. These unspoken conflicts accumulate quietly, shaping behavior and relationships in ways that are often invisible until a breaking point is reached. In the Reiner household, Romy discovered through her father's journal that these silent tensions were not only present, but had been intensifying for years. Rob's entries often highlighted moments when communication failed. He recorded instances where a casual remark might trigger a defensive response, or where an attempt to mediate a disagreement fell flat. One passage read, "Nick refuses to explain. I ask, he shuts down. I push, he withdraws. It's a pattern I don't know how to break." These were not dramatized observations. They were reflections of a father grappling with the subtle but persistent friction between himself and his son. Romy, reading the words, felt the weight of understanding someone so deeply, yet still feeling powerless to intervene. The journal also revealed tensions between Rob and Michelle, though these were often framed in the context of concern for their children. Rob noted times when disagreements about parenting strategies or household management would create a ripple effect, subtly influencing the mood of the entire home. "We argue about nothing," one entry read, "and yet the air changes. The kids feel it. I can see the tension settling like dust in the room." Romy realized that even small conflicts, left unresolved, had been layering over time, creating a volatile emotional landscape that no one outside the family could perceive. Nick's role in these conflicts was complex. Rob's journal chronicled instances of withdrawal, frustration, and unpredictable moods. Some entries suggested that he was aware of his own shortcomings, while others hinted at resentment toward perceived constraints. "He feels trapped sometimes," Rob wrote. "I try to give space, but space can be lonely and confusing. I don't know if he can hear me." Romy recognized these patterns from her own childhood memories. The silences, the tensions, the sense that her brother was navigating a world of expectations he didn't fully understand. The unspoken conflicts also extended to Romy herself. Rob had documented moments of her observation and involvement, noting her sensitivity and perceptiveness. He had recognized her ability to notice subtle emotional shifts, to sense tension before it became overt. But even her insight could not prevent the accumulation of unspoken conflicts. A reminder that awareness alone is insufficient when emotions are left unvoiced. Some passages hinted at moments of fear and avoidance. Rob wrote about conversations he had avoided, conflicts he had deferred, and concerns he had chosen to internalize rather than confront openly. These entries revealed a man who understood the delicate balance of family dynamics, but struggled with the knowledge that avoidance can sometimes exacerbate underlying issues. The tension between love and caution, intervention and restraint, pervaded the pages of the journal. Romy also noticed a recurring theme: miscommunication. Rob documented countless instances where intentions were misunderstood, words misinterpreted, and actions taken out of context. "I think I'm clear," One entry read, "But clarity doesn't always matter. Perception does. And perception is fleeting." These reflections underscored a truth that Romy would come to understand more deeply. In families, especially those under public scrutiny, the gap between intent and perception can have profound consequences. Even mundane disagreements had lasting impact. Rob noted arguments over schedules, responsibilities, and trivial decisions that, over time, created emotional friction. The journal revealed that these minor conflicts were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern. Small sparks that, when combined with fear, stress, and unspoken grievances, could ignite something far more dangerous. Romy began to see the tragedy not as a sudden eruption, but as the inevitable result of accumulated tension, fear, and misunderstanding. The journal also captured Rob's reflections on how to manage these conflicts. He experimented with approaches, giving space, asserting boundaries, mediating disputes. Yet, he acknowledged the limitations of his efforts. "I can try," he wrote, "but I cannot control everything. I cannot dictate emotions. I can only observe and hope." The weight of that admission struck Romy, a father trying to maintain harmony, fully aware of his limitations, and yet powerless to prevent the outcome that would soon unfold. These unspoken conflicts, Romy realized, were the threads that wove the fabric of the family's internal life. Each thread, individually minor, combined to form a web of tension, anxiety, and vulnerability. The journal offered a rare glimpse into these dynamics, revealing patterns and pressures invisible to outsiders, yet critically important to understanding the events that led to tragedy. As Romy continued to navigate the journal, she understood that the unspoken conflicts were intertwined with fear, secrecy, and love. They were not simple disputes. They were complex interactions, emotional undercurrents, and unresolved tensions that shaped behavior, perception, and ultimately, destiny. Recognizing this was painful, but it was necessary. Without acknowledging these silent battles, the story of the Reiner family would remain incomplete. And Romy sensed that even deeper revelations awaited, truths that went beyond unspoken conflicts into territory she had yet to confront, secrets that would further illuminate the forces at play within her family. In the quiet pages of her father's journal, Romy began to encounter words that unsettled her more than any news report or headline ever could. Beyond the careful observations, the reflections on family tension, and the records of daily life, there were entries that were cryptic, almost poetic, yet laced with ominous foreboding. Lines like "he's slipping away," and "the smallest spark could ignite everything," made her pause, her heart racing as she tried to interpret the meaning behind them. These entries were different from the earlier, more observational notes. They hinted at fears that Rob couldn't fully articulate, moments of intuition that defied logical explanation, and a sense that something was brewing just beneath the surface of family life. The cryptic nature of these passages left Romy both fascinated and terrified. They seemed to be warnings written for someone who would need to understand them later, someone who could piece together the patterns her father had noticed. Some entries referenced behaviors that Romy now recognized in hindsight. Nick's moods, sudden withdrawals, and moments of anger were described in ways that were almost prescient. Rob noted fluctuations that seemed minor at the time, but in retrospect appeared to foreshadow events that no one could have imagined. "The tension is contained for now," one entry read, "but I fear the release will be sudden and violent. I do not know when it will come." Romy felt the weight of those words. Her father had seen it coming, even if he could not stop it. The journal also contained entries that hinted at secrets the family had kept from the world, and perhaps even from themselves. Rob wrote about private fears, disagreements left unresolved, and situations that made him question what was normal or safe. There were mentions of moments when he felt powerless, when the carefully constructed image of perfection could no longer hide the growing instability. These passages revealed a man deeply aware of the fragility of his family's world, and a prescient understanding that appearances could no longer be relied upon to maintain control. Some cryptic lines referred to events that Romy could only partially decode. References to arguments, withdrawal, and subtle threats suggested an internal tension that had been escalating over time. "He moves in shadows," one line read. "I see him, but do I really know him? Romy recognized the duality in these words. Love intertwined with fear, observation mixed with helplessness. Her father had documented not just the behaviors, but the emotional undercurrents that surrounded them, creating a record that was as psychological as it was factual. The ominous signs were also apparent in Rob's reflections on his own role. He questioned whether his interventions, or lack thereof, had contributed to the family's instability. I try to guide, but sometimes guidance is unseen, unheard, one entry read. The journal conveyed an awareness that even careful observation and intention could not alter the trajectory of events when unspoken conflicts, fear, and emotional volatility were at play. Romy felt the weight of responsibility he had carried silently for so long, a burden she now inherited in understanding these hidden truths. Romy also noticed that these cryptic entries often coincided with emotional spikes in the family's interactions. Rob wrote about arguments that left lasting impressions, sudden silences that lingered longer than expected, and subtle behavioral cues that